Jesse, the deep dive this week is going to be an interesting one, and another one you've come up with a lovely idea. Explain to the lovely listeners what we're talking about today.
Well, I'm going to set the scene here because it was Friday night. It was 2 degrees in Tasmania. It was not 2 degrees in Perth, thank goodness for that. And there were lots of behinds being kicked. And with lots of behinds being kicked, you get lots of prolonged camera shots of the fullback digging the ball out and getting ready to hoik it down the other end as far as you can, or to the edge of the centre square if you're Luke Ryan. In the background, there were quite a few shots down there in Launceston. Was a big name sprawled on the back of one of the stands, and that name was Hudson. Mm-hmm. And it got me thinking about that name and Peter Hudson, who is the namesake of that, not to spoil anything, but that's who we're talking about today. We're talking about Peter Hudson.
Sure.
But it got me thinking about Peter Hudson and obviously Hawthorn and their legacy of Jason Dunstall and Lance Franklin. But I think people forget how good Peter Hudson was, or at least he's put to one side because he maybe doesn't have the volume of games. So we're going to talk about Peter Hudson today, and we're going to talk about him in a couple of contexts. We're going to talk about his peak, the moment that changed the course of history, and where he fits in that broader historical landscape. So for those who are on YouTube, you can see a lovely little graphic that Liam's put together. There we can see Peter Hudson's lovely sweeping left boot action, and as a left footer myself, I can appreciate a sweeping left boot.
Are you a lefty?
I'm a lefty.
Oh, no, that explains so much.
What, my talent for sniffing out a goal in the forward pocket?
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly.
I'm sure that's the only place you were going. But no, Peter Hudson was in a transitional period for the VFL as it was, because you talk about the greats of goal kicking in VFL AFL history. You're probably talking the interwar years of your Gordon Coventry's and Bob Pratts. Then I think John Coleman almost stands peerless in terms of impact throughout the 1950s. And another player that we could talk about in that cut short context. But Coleman's name survived the test of time. I don't think you can make the same argument that Hudson has to the extent of Coleman. And I think that's a shame, because Hudson started his career at New Norfolk in Tasmania, in the TA NFL as it was back then. The competition's gone through a few different iterations and naming conventions over the years. Came up to the mainland in 1967 to play for Hawthorn. As you can see on the graph, if you are on our YouTube page, he started respectably. Keep in mind, he was never one to not kick a goal in a game. I think he was only held goalless 3 times in his VFL AFL career. So
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Starts off a very solid 1967. Keep in mind, the Hawks for this late 60s period, even up to 1971, weren't particularly strong. There were better sides at this time period than Hawthorn, including St Kilda, who we're going to talk about a little bit later on as well. But 1968 is where Peter Hudson really starts to find his form. His first VFL ton, which he parlays comfortably into 1969. 1970, all of the goals you see on that screen, I think it's 146 is the number there, were kicked without the Hawks playing finals. That is insane when you think about that.
So these numbers that you've got on the screen here for us are all plus finals?
Including finals, yes.
Okay.
But that is an insane amount of goals.
Well, how many games were there in a season back then?
Talking 20.
Yeah, right. Okay, so that you're talking a pretty decent average, pretty decent click every game.
Well, we'll talk about his broad average in a little bit, Liam, but you're right. It is
Sure.
It is just, it's laser accuracy. Then we get to 1971, which is the crowning season of Peter Hudson. I think for a lot of Hawks fans of a certain vintage, probably their happiest moment. Hawks and Saints were the 2 dominant sides throughout the entire season. Hawks were clear, top of the ladder, number 1. Saints were in second. Both these teams were elite, with elite coaching staff as well. John Kennedy, senior at the Hawks, and Alan Jeans at Saints. Of course, Alan Jeans would later cross the divide and coach the Hawks in the 80s, and to tremendous success for that football club before that early 2010s period. Easily the strongest the Hawks had ever been was that 1980s period under Jeans. They were absolutely dominant. Going into the grand final, Hudson had kicked 147 goals. The match before the grand final, he kicked 7 against the Saints, who they'd meet again on that last day in September, in a 2-point win. So although there was a bit of a gap in terms of premiership points between these two sides going into the grand final, they'd proven a fortnight before they were pretty evenly matched, and Peter Hudson, in that game at least, was the difference maker. So going in, 147 goals led, needs 3 to tie Bob Pratt's record of 150, which has stood for 4 decades at this point. Needs 4 to break it.
Oh, you're setting up a scene, Jesse.
I am setting up a scene.
You're setting up a scene. Should I move to the scene?
You should move to the scene.
Here's the scene.
This moment on the screen right now, and we will talk through it for those on Spotify.
Yes.
But this moment changed the course of VFL AFL records, and in many people's opinions, the course of history. What you see on the screen right now is Kevin Neal, St Kilda veteran, a beloved figure at the club, nicknamed Cowboy, country New South Wales, I believe. Is definitely a country boy, but I believe he was from New South Wales. Lining up Peter Hudson in the first quarter and hitting him as hard as he possibly can.
As was the thing to do back then.
As was the thing to do.
Yeah.
Over the right side of his face. Now, unsurprisingly, this was a free kick. But this was 54 years ago. So you're not talking a camera replaying on every angle. You're not talking a club doctor who can do anything more than, "Are you okay?" Yeah. And you're certainly not talking a HIA.
Sure.
I think it's fair to say that Peter Hudson probably couldn't see much after this hit. And he'd already had 2 goals at this point. Alan Jeans had almost budgeted for Hudson to kick 6 in the grand final. That was seen as just about automatic going into this game. So the strike in the first quarter with the Hawks on top changes things. Hudson goes back to take his kick. Keep in mind, he is almost automatic. You know, we talk about accurate goal kickers these days. You're talking maybe they'll kick 3 goals straight and everyone's happy.
Yeah, sure.
Hudson kicked 16 goals 1 in 1969 against Melbourne.
Wow.
That's all you need to know about his accuracy. So Hudson goes back. He doesn't miss. It doesn't register a behind. He just misses everything. Goes straight out in the full.
And everyone was just like, what's going on here?
That's the moment you realise something is wrong.
Well, but before you continue, was Cowboy just sent out there to literally just do that? Because back in the day, that was a bit of a tactic, wasn't it?
Well, this is where things get quite interesting because Neal wasn't his initial opponent. But after Hudson kicked his first 2 early, the switch was made. Neal had said pre-game jokingly to Alan Jeans that he can't kick 6 goals if he's unconscious, which turned out to be prophetic. But to his dying day in 2023, Neal insisted that it was not a premeditated decision, and it was a heat of the moment, split-second thing to do. And Hudson and Neal actually remained good friends until Neal's passing. They were able to move past the ugliness of this incident. But this is a big problem for John Kennedy Sr. as a coach, because your clear best player, the guy who's chalked up insane numbers also, he kicked 7 a fortnight ago, can barely see. Things get worse for Hudson too. He gets the ball 15 metres out on a slight angle, straight into the man on the mark. Hudson reckons he never did that more than one other time in his career. It was...
Well, I mean, he wasn't seeing straight, clearly. He was all over the shop. You're not going to get by after getting a punch right across the temple, are you, Jesse?
No. He did get his Pratt tying goal. He was given what I'm going to say is it's a technical free kick. He was pushed in the back, but it was one of the ones that these days to make people go, "Oh, that's very silly." But given he was also belted in the head and not given an automatic 50 metres for being belted in the head, I think we can let him have it. And honestly, the fact he's able to kick it from directly in front, even when seeing four goalposts per 1 goalpost, is probably a pretty good result. We're going to save a lot of the nuance of the 1971 grand final, specifically the last quarter, for a different deep dive, because I think, honestly, this game in itself deserves a complete run through because it is incredible. Hawthorn win, having gone in, having been 5 goals
Spoilers,
down.
Jesse.
I know, I'm spoiling something that happened 54 years ago. Having been 5...
People still get mad about Star Wars being spoiled for them.
Never seen it, don't care for it. I
haven't seen it either.
No, look at that. Saints gave away a 5-goal lead halfway through the third quarter to lose the grand final after Kennedy made a genius switch at 3/4 time that saved the game for the Hawks and chalked up their second premiership. The Saints, who had 1 premiership at the time, remain as such. The Hawks, though, completely different story.
So why was this the moment that changed history, though? What was so important about this particular right hook?
Well, you now have a tied goal-kicking record. No one's ever going to kick 150 goals in a season again.
No.
Not at this level. True. It's not going to happen. No. Hudson and Pratt will forever share that record, and in a sense, there's something nice about that. But this changed the history books, and we can talk about this today. We could talk about this in another 50 years. The fact of the matter is we'll be talking about the fact that Neil's right hook in the first quarter of 1971 grand final forever froze a record. And he needed to kick one more, sure, but I don't think anyone is going to argue that, barring another freak injury or incident, he would have kicked two more and broken the record. He was that good.
Amazing.
And
you go, Jesse. You're on a roll.
Did you have a point to make about the grand final, Liam? Was that why you jumped
about the grand final? No, I don't.
About Hudson.
No, all I was going to say was that it kind of goes to show like how little is known, especially by maybe a fan like myself. I had no idea about Peter Hudson, and you sent me some of these notes, and I was like, God damn. And we don't get to look back at these players enough, I don't think. The modern footy is fine. You follow your team, you do what you want, but there were some pretty good players back in the day, weren't there? And a lot of them just how many there were when people like Peter Hudson tend to go by the wayside just a smidge. That's all I was going to say.
Well, I think you're 100% right. It's something we could definitely look at going back through, because Hudson almost gets this piece on this podcast because he is historically significant. Peter McKenna, another one of his key contemporaries in the forward stakes, who won back-to-back Colemans after Hudson's demise, which we'll come to in a second, probably doesn't get talked about at all, and certainly less than Hudson. And Hudson, I think, barely breaches a mention almost ever. So we'll talk about that now, Liam, because things went awry for Hudson after the Zenith. Gets his premiership medal, clearly at the peak of his powers, is not showing any signs of goal-kicking issues, and then the knees go. So successive injuries in 1972, 1973, 1974. The first one was actually thought to be ending his career at the time, such was the severity. He just simply couldn't get out of the blocks for the next 3 seasons, and Hawthorn faltered as a result. They missed their superstar forward. They had a very good team still. In fact, Lee Matthews would step in to win a Coleman medal in Hudson's place in 1975. By that point, Hudson was gone entirely from the VFL. He'd moved back to Tasmania, joined up with Glenorchy in the TANFL, and was working in the hospitality and hotelier scene at that point. He certainly was dominant when he went back.
Hugely dominant.
I sent you some of his numbers, didn't I, Liam? His numbers were incredible.
You did. I'm going to go back to the first slide, Jesse. I'm going to go back here because the numbers on here. Because I was going to ask you about this little dip here. Because obviously, when you look at that graph that you've put together, amazing. And then there is an absolute chasm in between his 71 and his 77. But in the Tanful, is that how you say it? I think it's Tanful.
We'll go with
it's
Tanful.
The waffle. It's the Tanful, right? It's the Tanful. So after this injury, 75, he went back to Tassie and played for who, did you say?
Glenorchy, which is a Hobart-ish based team.
What a name. 76 goals in 75, 133 in 76, 153 in 78, and then 179 goals.
That's so many goals.
In 1979, he must have been like 79, 179, let's go for it. That's an insane number of goals. So what was it though? So was it just a case of that the competition was obviously not as good as the VFL? Was that the idea?
Yes, but it's also worth pointing out at this time, the state leagues, including Tasmania, were stronger. In fact, the VFL did not even have a complete grip over Australian rules at this time. In fact, the VFA was mounting a challenge in the 1970s with their Sunday time slots and faster game style to upend the VFL. So while history will tell you now that the AFL won the wars and became the omnipresent league in the country, even as recently as the 70s, and I would probably go as far to say the very early 80s, until the VFL expanded, it was a lot more even than it was. And Hudson, well, yes, you look at those numbers and think that is completely dominant. There must have been a bunch of part-time farmers. Just about everyone was in that era. And the numbers aren't necessarily misaligned with what he was doing in the VFL. But Liam, you missed a year in those numbers. You missed 1977.
yes.
And there's a reason for that. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't a mistake. It's because Hudson went back. And he went back on a FIFO arrangement to play for Hawthorn one last time. Got 110 goals in a FIFO season, bagged the Coleman, and then went back to Glenorchy.
Just casually.
Just casually.
Just casually. Let's give it a crack. I would love to know if they can make like a FIFO player work nowadays. All these players get homesick all the time, so don't worry about it. FIFO. Just fly over.
I mean,
stay at home.
If we use a sample size of 1, it clearly can. Maybe if you reverse this, you can actually get some players willing to go to a Tasmanian team.
Well, true. If it ever happens. Very true, Jesse. Very true. All right, now shall we move on to his accolades?
Let's move on to
his legend.
Because he is just that. 4-time Coleman medalist, 1971 premiership player, the highest goals per game average of 5.64 in VFL AFL history.
That's stupid.
Keep in mind, we're going to do things like cap it at, say, 10 games because we don't want silly numbers. That's never going to be broken. Ever. Ever.
Well, what about the likes of your Dunstals and your pluggers? Like, where would they sit?
Well, Coleman was second on 5.5, and it is worth quantifying that those guys did miss out on a significant amount of their career through knee injuries. Coleman shattered his knee beyond repair. Hudson was able to come back, but missed prime years of his career through both a lack of confidence in his body afterwards and just the 3 seasons he missed by virtue of being on the shelf. So, yes, you could talk about that. You know, the average probably does naturally decrease if he does play out those seasons. But you look at the way he played in 1977, I'm not sure that's actually a clear-cut argument. Because he's been out of the VFL system for 6 years in terms of full seasons, and he's come back and kicked a ton.
Yeah.
You know, that's... You can make any argument you want to fit your narrative, but I don't think it's simple as saying the average is going to demonstrably decrease based on that. They had 6 years to figure out an answer to stop Peter Hudson. The game had changed in that time, and they still couldn't do it. And he still kicked a ton. Off FIFO, which can't have been easy for the body compared to what he would have been used to.
Yeah, fair. I mean, it's not a massively long trip. I mean, I'm not too sure what it was actually back in the 70s. You know, would you ever get the Spirit of Tasmania across to?
No, he was flying. He wasn't SISO. Spirit in, spirit out. He was flying. A legend in the Hall of Fame, tied third for the most goals in an individual game, the fastest to reach 300, 400, 500, and 600 goals in VFL AFL history. His legacy is that of a true great of the game. He's got the honour in the Hall of Fame, but his name probably doesn't carry the respect and the gravitas as it should alongside your Ablett Seniors, your Locketts, your Dunstals, even your Franklins.
Was it a charisma thing, Jesse? Was he not a very charismatic man like the other ones were?
I don't necessarily think... I honestly think it's just a case of injuries robbed us of a player that I think you could make a legitimate argument could have been the greatest full forward of all time. It's hard to say when you've also got a big asterisk over a guy like Coleman as well, and we can do Coleman in a deep dive as well later in the season. If that's what people would like, let us know in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in. I probably owe the Essendon fans one after ripping apart their drafting over the last decade or so. But I think for me, it's easier sometimes to gravitate towards the devil you know with your Locketts, your Dunstals. But Hudson, with the exception of Peter McKenna, really was alone in terms of dominant, omnipresent key forwards. Like, Lockett had Ablett and Dunstall. I think Coleman could probably be put into this as well, but even guys like Gordon Coventry with Bob Pratt, you know, whereas Hudson was so far clear of his peers at that time. McKenna is a elite forward and a forward that should go down in the annals of history a lot more than he does. But I mean, even then, there's a big difference between first and second there. This was an excellent Hawks team, benefiting from a generational forward that did bridge the gap between Coleman and then your Dunstals and your Locketts.
Very good, Jesse. What a lovely little deep dive that was. I enjoyed that because I like learning. Learning is fun. And if you learn, dear listener, as well, please let us know. If you want, like Jesse said, we can do Coleman, we can do anyone. If you have a player that you think is, you know, not talked about enough, let us know in the comments.
I'm not doing one on Jacob Surgeon. Go watch the 2004 Grand Final if you care that much.
Srđan, good Croatian boy, I am led to believe by friends and family alike. All right, so no Srđan, no surgeons, but anyone else, Jesse will do. Jesse will put something together within reason. Thanks, Jesse. Let us know in the comments down below, everybody. Very nice. Very nice.